I think I also just always believed like there's nothing you can't do if you apply common sense and passion.
Hi, I'm Gracie Mercedes, and welcome back to Not Blank Enough, a podcast about everyday insecurities and triumphs. In this episode, I'm talking with Mandana Dayani. The Iranian-American entrepreneur and activist talks about her family's immigration story, how she went from being a lawyer to working in fashion, and how her love for America fuels her activism. I hope you enjoy this insightful conversation we titled Not Doing Enough. Hi, Mandana. Welcome to Not Blank Enough.
Hi, friend.
Thank you for being here. I haven't seen you in so long.
I know. It's been a crazy.
Oh, yes.
How are you guys doing?
We're good. We're holding up as well as we can on our end. Yeah, so we can just jump into it. Basically, the show is all about feeling that blank throughout your life. And usually we start from the beginning, like where you're from and a little bit about your childhood.
Yeah. I was born in Iran. I have an older brother. He's like 5 years older than me. And we were born in the middle of a war. So it was a little bit crazy. And then when I was around 5, we left Iran and went to Italy. We went to the small town called Dissenters, which a lot of I think religious refugees went there before they tried to come to America. And then we were there for about a year. And then through this Jewish organization called HIAS that helps different Jewish families resettle in America, we've got asylum to come here. And I was like probably almost 6 years old when we got here. We went first to New York, and then we lived in like a little studio in Queens, like all 4 of us slept on a bed, and they set us up at this like amazing school. And then within a couple years, my dad found out from like a cousin that Beverly Hills had the best public schools. And so we came out here and rented the last apartment that was like technically zoned as Beverly Hills. And then just kind of started over. I mean, obviously their careers and educations didn't totally translate. So it was definitely very difficult, I think, for them to like learn how to speak English, for us to learn how to speak English and find jobs and like friends and communities and all of that stuff. But I think it was weird. It like taught us so much hustle, but it really taught us how to rely on each other. And I mean, there's this weird part where you're almost never a kid, because I had to raise my parents and like help them figure out what an interest rate is or how to apply for a credit card and all that stuff, when I'm 9.
Yeah.
But there's this security in going through experiences like that where you kind of know that you're always going to be okay because you have each other and you've been through so much crazy shit already. I also think it was like the very formative experience in just what ultimately became like my dedication to my patriotism and loving America. I think was just this idea that I just always knew at a very young age how lucky I was to be here, right? Like I knew how shitty my life could have been had I not been given this incredible privilege to come here. And there were so many people that couldn't come. And I think that like created a sense of loyalty, but also a sense of like obligation to give back. And yeah, I mean, like we always had like American flags growing up in our home. And it was just like it was funny. It was just like, this is really a big part of our identity and our privilege, to be honest. Even though it was like hard, it was very clear how lucky we were.
Yeah, and that's such an immigrant story. I feel like a lot of my guests have been first generation, and we talk about that sense of obligation to not only, love this country, but to also help others and to kind of be the best person you can be. Because if your parents didn't come here, your life would have been very different, like you said.
Yeah.
And what was it like growing up in Beverly Hills as, this young immigrant kid? You spoke English though, right?
Eventually, we didn't when we came to America. So that was definitely a learning curve. None of us did.
Oh, wow.
And that's like, I think about that all the time. Like, can you imagine having 2 kids and being dropped in New York, which is like insane, not speaking the language, not knowing anyone, not having any money? I mean, I have no idea how my parents managed to figure that out.
Isn't that insane?
It's insane. I think about it all the time. Never complained and just were like, figured it out.
Right.
I mean, I think we were raised with like the very true, like American dream immigrant story, right? Like my brother became a surgeon. I became an attorney. It was like, that's, kind of how it all was always like, these are your options for a career. It was always like, what can you do to have a very stable and secure life? we were never really like raised to be artists or to pursue our passions or like what we love. It was just like, what is secure? What is stable? How can you provide for your family? Such an immigrant thing, right?
It's such an immigrant thing because I had this conversation in another podcast. It's like, I waited till I was 30 to pursue acting because I always felt this pressure of, no, you can't be an actress. That's insane. Like your mom came here when she was a kid to give you a better life. And it's just like, it feels like irresponsible. Like you have to do well. There has to be a guarantee.
Hobby. It was like, it's a hobby. You can do that an hour a week. That's a cute hobby.
Yes, exactly.
That was always like the vibe. I mean, it was definitely difficult and there were a lot of challenges financially and everything. And it was definitely, what's nice about growing up in Beverly Hills is there are huge communities of Iranians and Jewish communities. So it wasn't like we were alone, but I mean, there was definitely it's hard to start over and financially be struggling when you're living in Beverly Hills.
And was there ever a feeling of being like not rich enough or not American enough?
I credit my parents for this. I never realized that we didn't really have any money until I was older. I felt like my house was like the fun house and we lived in like a shitty 2-bedroom like apartment and our friends lived in like $30 million houses and they still came to my house because we had like the good snacks and my dad is so funny and my mom is so nice. And like, I never even noticed that there was a difference and we just had fun and we're so close as a family. So I don't know. I feel like it was a very, very different experience when I was living it to when I look back. Now, when I look back, I'm like, oh yeah, that was so weird. Like all these things are so weird looking back. I can't believe we didn't have a car. I didn't even notice that we didn't have a car. That's so weird, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. My parents were just where they focused their energy with us and tried as hard as they could to never make us feel like we were lacking in anything was heroic.
That really is amazing because I can't even imagine being in Beverly Hills and going to your friend's mansion and not feeling like, what the heck? I know growing up in New York City, we all lived in apartments. Very few people had houses.
Yeah.
And so if anyone had a house or a house and a pool, it was like, oh my God, it was like such a big deal because almost everyone in New York and Brooklyn and Manhattan lived in, some tiny apartment or some, if you were lucky, lived in like a 2-family house kind of situation.
Yeah.
And so then what was school like? So you said there was an Iranian community in Beverly Hills. So did you go to school with other kids like you or who looked like you?
Yeah, I went to public schools basically always. I went to elementary school and high school at a public school in Beverly Hills, which was great and pretty diverse and nice. And I just worked so hard. I was always such like an intense gunner. So for me, it was just like doing as well as I can in school, volunteering, like activism, I guess is the term that we use now. Back then, I just really didn't know what it was, but I started doing that. I think in 4th grade is like when it really became very formative for me and was a huge part of how I spent my free time. And then I went to college and law school at USC because I had to stay within a 1-mile radius of my family or they would have lost their goddamn minds. And so, I think that I went to law school or I was okay and interested because I really did think like I wanted to run for public office one day. And then I just, you get sidetracked and you're in school and then I had the most amazing job at a law firm coming out of law school. And then from there, I was like, it just all kind of progresses from there. And my life has taken a lot of unexpected pivots in my career.
When you were doing your activism in 4th grade, what was that about? Like what kind of activism were you doing?
I think back to like the conversation about just, this sense of wanting to level the playing field for others. Like I felt so privileged and so lucky to have a chance at the American dream. And I always felt like I needed to give that back to as many people as I could. So I think when I was younger, it like started with, learning about the environment and like starting the ecology club. And then I started integrating like give backs into our school and I would organize all these volunteer events. There's this amazing organization in LA called LA Works. And I started as like one of their project leaders in elementary school. And then I would organize these community events and I would organize like LA Works Day, which was like thousands of volunteers. I mean, it just became such a fun way for me to learn how to organize before I even knew what that was. And just really figuring out how to make giving back fun and incorporating it into what I was doing with my friends and volunteering and doing like canned food drives at school. And, I don't know, it was just like then. And then by the time I got into high school, it just got more and more and more. And then I started volunteering on campaigns and I started doing more events. And then I would say like the first foundation I helped start was called World Child Project. And that was really we were going like once a month to Mexico and trying to help orphanages in Mexico become self-sustaining because they receive no funding from the government. So we would help them build like greenhouses or like build computer labs and things like that. And I did that with a bunch of other incredible people.
My God, you do so much. I love it. I didn't know this about you. I mean, I know you do all this now because I can see it through Instagram and stuff.
Yeah.
But I didn't realize this was something you started so young.
I never really talked about it, partially because I was around so many people that did it. And I think that was the privilege of like doing it so early, is that becomes like the people that you know and your friends. So it didn't even seem remarkable. I was like, oh, like we all do this stuff. It's so cool.
Right.
And I don't know. It was so important to me. It just was such a big part of like my life. I don't know. And how I thought about everything.
And then in your adulthood, so you went to law school and then you said you worked at a law firm. And then what happened?
I was there. So I got a job, an amazing job at a huge firm, which I still love, by the way. They're actually now the pro bono counsel and I'm a voter. So it came like very full circle, which is very weird.
Oh, wow.
But I think about like 2 years into it, I was like, oh my God, I don't want to do this. I never really knew what I wanted to do, but I just knew that I didn't want to be there. I think I'm just like such an entrepreneur and it's not the right environment for someone who just has like really big ideas and wants to connect with humans and like build and build and build.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea what I wanted to do. And part of that, I think, is in a weird way, like comes back to being an immigrant because I was never surrounded by anyone who did anything other than be a lawyer or a doctor. So when my husband was like, well, what do you want to do? I was like, this is weird. I actually don't know what anyone does. I've never met an architect. Like I've never had a conversation with an editor and was like, what do you edit things? Like, what is your actual job?
Right.
And I had no exposure to what anyone did. And it's such a weird thing to realize when you're an adult and you're like, but I don't even know what I would do because I literally don't know. Like, what does an agent do?
Right.
Like, what is their actual job?
I don't know.
And so I started this like 2-month process of taking people out for coffee. I was like, I swear I'm not asking you for a job, but I feel like you do something cool. Can I just ask you what your job is and like what makes you good at it? And I think it takes like a certain level of self-awareness, but I sat down in meetings with all these people and I was like, oh my God, I would be horrible at that. That's so uninteresting. That is interesting. I don't know. I just would have these like very strong, like gut responses to everything. And then I did a lot of licensing as an attorney. So I was really interested in this idea of like brand and their value. I'm like such a marketer in my brain and I always have been since I was a kid. And that's a whole different story. But I had coffee with this guy who was a commercial talent agent, which means like he does big endorsement and licensing deals for his clients. And he was like, oh, I just signed all these fashion clients and I really want to turn them into like brands. And I was like, I was the most fashion obsessed, crazy person you've ever met in your entire life. But again, I was raised as like, that's a hobby. I read fashion books. I can tell you when every designer was born and what they do and what they love.
Right.
But I was like, not ever would be a job. I also didn't know what anyone did in fashion. I thought you were like a designer, which I clearly don't know how to do. And so I was like, oh my God, I want to do that. Can I come to your office on Monday? And I'll just like start working for you. You don't have to pay me. I just want to see what you do. And he's like, but you're a lawyer. What are you talking about? I was like, I'm just going to show up. And I literally just showed up. And then I started seeing what he did. And I thought it was like so fascinating. And so Rachel Zoe at the time was one of his clients and she had the big show on Bravo and they were trying to figure out like how to continue to leverage and grow her brand. She was one of probably the most recognizable name in fashion at the time. And I was like, this is insane. There's so much that you can leverage this IP into. And we started working on the licensing deal for her to launch a fashion brand. And I worked on that deal for about 6 months. And then she looked at me one day and she was like, do you want to come help me launch this? And this is just like my true thing where I'm always like, of course, I know how to do everything, even though I don't know how to do anything. And I was like, of course, absolutely. And I think like 4 days later, I was on a plane to New York. And we were like, I was building a brand book and hiring designers and finding a studio and like figuring out what we were doing. And it just went
holy shit
so quickly from there with that and the Zoe report and the books and the TV show. I mean, all the things that we've done, but that was insanity. And it was really amazing to be around someone as entrepreneurial as her and someone like Roger who just were game to do anything, build anything. I feel like I got a master's in 8 different things and businesses. And then I think about almost 6 years after I started working with her, I left to go work to help relaunch this tech company. So I always do the thing that kind of terrifies me. And when I was working with Rachel, the Zoe report was growing so quickly. And we had been on the venture side investing money in some digital businesses that were starting to really grow. And I was like, oh, this is the future. And I knew it pretty well from doing it, but I knew how much I didn't know the more time I would spend in it. And I was like, this is the future. I need to understand this. And so like, what is the furthest extreme from what I'm doing now that would allow me to learn this? And this woman who's like an incredible, huge female VC was like, hey, I just put a ton of money into this company. They're raising $30 million and they need to like rebrand and relaunch. It was like some Midwest company I'd never heard of.
Right.
And I was like, yes, that's amazing. I want to go figure that out.
You are so brave. You just like go. You're like, yeah, I'll learn it on the way. Like that's what I'm getting from you and admire from you. And it's so funny because it's like, this obviously started very young.
Yeah.
So a part of me wants to know, like, where do you get this like gumption from?
I think that it's the immigrant hustle, because one, when you have no money, you have no safety net. So you're just like, you have to figure shit out. Mm-hmm. But we also just literally had to like, in a weird way, kind of fake it till we made it for a long time, just to assimilate. And so there was this part of me of like, okay, well, I need to go to college and I have to pay for this. So I'm going to apply for every single scholarship. I literally applied for like the Vietnamese Scholarship of Excellence. I just was like, I give no fucks. I will do whatever it takes to figure this stuff out.
Right.
And so I think that becomes a huge part of just whatever the hustle is. You can drop me anywhere and I will figure out how to navigate, because that was my whole life for so long, figuring out how to navigate me, my parents, their life, their businesses, their health, all of that stuff. And so it just was all very intertwined. I think I also just always believed like there's nothing you can't do if you apply common sense and passion. And that's always how I've hired people. I never actually ever cared what was on someone's resume. If someone came in and was like obsessed with the company or the brand and knew everything about it and was so excited and just pitched me on how hard they would work, I would hire that person 1,000 times more quickly than I would hire the person that came from like Google.
I love that, because I also feel like that's a big part of like when they say representation matters and like helping someone else up, because I think a lot of times people don't get opportunities because maybe what they look like or their education or their experience. But if they have that passion and that drive and that work ethic, yeah, give them a shot. And so many people won't give them a shot.
I actually think the person that was like handed admission to Princeton and did really well is so much less interesting to me than the person that had to like hustle and overcome every single adversity to get a scholarship to like Arizona State University. That person to me, I mean, what they had to figure out to get there is heroic. That I would always take that person. Yeah, I worked there for about 2 years. I mean, that was really fast and we raised a ton of money and it grew very, very rapidly. It's weird. All of my big shifts happened as I had kids. Like when I had my first daughter was when I, transitioned from Rachel to EBTH. And then I think when my second daughter was born, it's also probably not coincidental. It was just, I actually had to stop. And I think when you pause, like we have done this year, we really start evaluating our lives and who we've become. And so I spent quite a bit of time just like watching the news and listening and reading. And I was seeing our country and how divided it was. And I was like, what the fuck is am I allowed to swear? Yeah. Sorry, I keep doing it.
Yeah. I swear all the time.
I was like, what the fuck is happening here?
Mm-hmm.
This isn't like America. This isn't the America that welcomed me and my family. And I was like, I need to do something. Like I need to give back. I'm an advisor on so many different companies and I should just start advising different senators and congressmen on their campaigns, or like figure out a way that I can leverage my skills somehow and support what's happening. And then when the child separation thing happened, I was watching it on the news. I'll never forget. I was sitting like on the bed in our guest room and I was like, when your insides like implode, every part of me just imploded. And I was like, I literally just can't understand. There's no part of my brain that can imagine that like what it takes to leave your homeland and travel through absolute fucking hell to come here and survive that journey because you believe this is like your safe harbor. And for us to do the absolute worst thing you could do to a human. I mean, it was an entirely punitive policy. It was meant to hurt as hard as it can so that other people wouldn't come here. And there is nothing you could do to a human being. I would rather you light me on fire before you take my kid out of my hand. And to think like that visceral response, even as a mom, when you don't know where your kid is for 2 seconds, to imagine that we separated these people in their most vulnerable times. We lost kids, we orphaned kids, we have never returned some to their families. There is no worse atrocity that I think our government could have committed. And when watching that moment, I was like, there's no way this is real.
Right.
I got on a plane, I went to Texas, and I was like, I'm going to go see this camp. And I saw the camp and within weeks quit my job and started this whole journey. I mean, I sat down with everybody and was like, what the fuck is happening to this country? Like, why is this happening? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? And everyone was like, well, care about this issue, then we need more people to vote. And then if you care about this issue, we need more people to vote. And I was like, who's not voting? What are you talking about?
Right.
And then I looked at the numbers and I'm like, 100 million people didn't vote that could have voted in the last election. 100 million people.
Mm-hmm.
69% of young voters didn't vote. Literally 31% of young voters voted in the last election. I was like, again, as an immigrant, you're just like, I always want to vote. This is amazing because I lived in a dictatorship and that's not the coolest thing ever. And my brain exploded. I was like, I cannot understand how we have failed so terribly at participating in our own democracy and acknowledging the incredible privilege we have of even being allowed to participate in our democracy. And then that kind of was the beginning of this whole new phase of my life.
And that's when you launched I Am a Voter?
Yeah. I mean, by the way, I had no idea what I was launching. I had no idea what I was doing. I felt like, okay, this is the problem is participation. How do we increase participation? And given my background, I was like, well, we make people excited to do things all the time. We launch 10 Marvel movies a year and make people think it's going to change their lives. And like the new mascara that you've never experienced, how can we not get them to understand that voting is so important? And to me, part of that comes from how we message and how we brand voting. And the other comes from like, we do an incredibly shitty job of teaching civics in this country. And no one in our country knows how our country works. And so no one knows how to hold our country accountable when it doesn't work, because it's clearly not working. When 90% of Americans want stronger background checks and we can't get it passed, our government isn't working. It's not representing Americans.
Yeah. And that's the big flaw, in our country in general, in the education system. We're not learning accurate history. We're not learning how the government works. We're not learning how stakes work. We are literally not learning anything that is actually useful when you get out of school. We're learning a lot of things that are like, this is what you learn to get into high school, and this is what you learn to get into college. But we're not learning how to survive as human beings in this country and get what we want and need.
Yes. And again, America is a promise. It's an opportunity to be something, but it only becomes that thing if we create it and we push it and we continue to challenge it to live up to its potential. It's not like you just show up and you expect it to be this like amazing thing forever. And America has had very dark times and it has had not dark times, but this is a real reckoning. I mean, to experience this kind of unrest and this kind of division in our country, it's not working. Like there are things that we need to fix. The reality is it doesn't fix if people don't participate. And that was the part that I couldn't understand. And so, I mean, it really started with just being like, okay, we need to rebrand voting and we need to make it like the coolest, sexiest thing that's ever happened. And all I knew was the people that could figure that out with me. And so I emailed like 25 women, because I just believe women are the ones who get shit done. And we all sat in a room and really just started laying the foundation for what this could look like and how we could build this together. And it's been genuinely the most rewarding experience of my entire life.
And I feel like it's gotten so big because from just the people I follow on Instagram at these major brands, and you have a collaboration with like everyone right now. It's so incredible. It's just like, I'm a voter. I just see it everywhere and I love it. And it really is exciting. And I think it does help get people excited about voting. And, it's been a year and I think this reckoning is happening for a reason and the timing is great. And hopefully people actually get out there in November. This episode is going to air 2 weeks before the election, which is why I wanted to talk to you beforehand.
Yeah.
Is there any, advice or things you can tell our audience to help make sure their vote is counted?
So the easiest thing I would suggest is, text the word voter, VOTER, to 26797. When you do that, you can confirm your registration. You can receive a reminder for every local, state, and federal election. You can find out if you can vote by mail, what your deadline is, if you can vote early, where your polling location is, what you need to bring with everything you need to know will be delivered to you through this text platform for all elections. And participating in local elections is as important as participating in federal elections. And so just being on a platform where you have that information, I think is a huge game changer. You will never be messaged with like, donate $5. We've never messaged anyone with like, well, here's our new collab. It's literally just election reminders and information that you need. And so I think that's the first step. I think with this election, because there is so much at stake, because there's so much uncertainty, and obviously with COVID, I just think the most important thing people can do is have a plan. It's knowing exactly how you want to vote. There's obviously several different options. You can vote early in person, which I would always suggest is the best preference. You can vote by mail. You can drop off your mail in ballot at a secure Dropbox location, or you can vote in person. No matter what that is, you need to know how you're going to do it so you accurately plan for it. And if you're going to mail it in, I just would do it the first day that you can.
Yeah.
like literally the first day that it arrives, just fill it out and put it in the mail because like, there's going to be anticipated delays. This is going to be a contested election. And so I just think having your voice heard is so important and checking in with your friends and your family. So like the first step is like figure your own shit out and then figure it out for the people that you know and you love. And like whatever chat groups are in, like just drop in and be like, hey guys, I just finished like making my voting plan. Have you guys done it? It's really easy. This is what I'm doing. And just do that with as many people as you can, because I do think that pressure is really important.
Yeah.
I think that like we are a community and we are all responsible to each other. And that's honestly the collective participation is the only way we're going to get through this.
Wow. You've given me so much. I'm just like in such awe of you and your life. It's really incredible. So going back to the theme of the show, has there ever been a moment, whether it was as a child or more recently, where there was a blank, there was something you didn't feel enough of? And if so, what was that?
I honestly feel like that every day still. And I could put 100 things. I think every day, because I'm trying to manage so much, I feel like I'm not a mom enough to my kids. I feel like I'm not doing enough to help, even on, I know we didn't get to talk about this enough, but with the Dissenters podcast, all we talk about every day is like all these amazing people doing incredible things for all these causes. And I'm like, shit, I'm not doing enough about the environment. I'm not doing enough to reduce plastic. I'm not doing enough to help the LGBT community. I'm not doing enough to stand with, these other communities. I know that's really hard on myself and I don't mean to sound negative, but if I'm being honest, I think I actually feel that way all the time. Like I'm like the worst wife to my husband. I work 20 hours a day now and I'm like, I have no time to talk to him. I feel horrible.
I love you so much because I love hearing this from you because I'm like, you are literally saving the world. You're helping to save the world. And the fact that you're so hard on yourself makes complete sense because anyone who's that driven to be doing so many things, to be trying to help so many people is of course going to think I'm not doing enough in X, Y, or Z. And I was going to ask you that earlier when you talked about having your baby girls. I was like, how the hell did she have how did you even have one baby, let alone two, and do all this stuff? And so it's interesting that you say, not feeling mom enough or a good enough wife because you do have so much going on that it's like, where is all this time coming from?
I'm not sleeping enough. So I'm like completely neglecting myself, which nobody should do. So don't follow my example because it's terrible. I have a lot of help. My husband's amazing and my family all lives by me and they all help. And I have a nanny. And again, I'm like incredibly lucky to have the structure and support and all the women that work on the campaign. And then Deborah, who I do the podcast with, like there is so much support. It's never feels like it's enough because there's so much to do. I just know what's at stake in this election. And I know that in however many days when this election is over, I need to be able to live with myself and whether I felt like I did enough. And right now I haven't. There's still more to do. There's still more people to talk to. There's still more people to engage and register. And so I'm so driven by understanding the magnitude of what is at stake that quite honestly, I'm not trying to sound hyperbolic. Literally nothing feels enough.
I love that. And I totally get that. And I think we can name this episode Not Doing Enough because that's such an interesting thing to hear from someone who is doing so much. Can you talk really quick I want to hear more about your podcast.
So this podcast is called The Dissenters, and I started it with one of my best friends, Deborah Messing, who's an actress and an incredible humanitarian and activist. And it really started because our journeys in activism have been inspired by so many people. And we really wanted to meet them and just fangirl over them. Because to us, those are like the biggest celebrities in the world. But we also just wanted to share the reality that activism is something that you can just do to one person. It's something you can do on the phone with your mom. It could be like a small act to a huge act. But the idea that I think people push off that kindness and empathy and showing up and participation because they're like, I don't have enough money. I don't have enough followers. I don't know enough about this cause. I don't know what I would do. I'm so nervous. I'm so scared. It's like all of these people were like that. They had no idea what they're like. Shannon Watts, who's my hero, who is classified every single year as the NRA's worst enemy and has literally brought them down, was a stay-at-home mom of 5 when she built Moms Demand Action in every town. She knew nothing about guns, but she was like, this is fucked up and I've had enough. And she was committed to learning through the process. And you hear all of these stories of all of these heroes who felt really impacted by something or experienced something and was like, just that's not okay. And I'm going to say something about it. I'm going to do something about it. And every story has been so incredibly inspiring. I mean, I think obviously we named the podcast after RBG's iconic I Dissent slogan. And so losing her this week was unbearable to us. We actually today just released our RBG tribute episode and we brought back 3 of our past dissenters to talk about like her effect, and just having that conversation about what Ruth Bader Ginsburg has done for women's equality. I was sobbing, like just listening and hearing and sharing. And it's just, I think it made this election and what is at stake and our role in it so much more real.
No, absolutely. Oh my God. Well, I got to say this. I'm super inspired by you. And I feel like I'm not doing enough. I'm like, I got to get off of this podcast interview and go do a million more things, because there is so much to be done. And it feels so pressing and so dire right now. And so to know that there are people like you out there getting shit done makes me feel better, but then also inspires me to do more. So thank you. And thank you for being on this podcast.
It's also so good to see your face.
I know. I haven't seen you so long. I haven't seen anyone in so long. I mean, we haven't seen anyone in so long.
This is insanity.
Well, thank you, Mandana.
No, thank you. This was awesome.
Thanks so much for listening. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Until next time, know that you are more than enough. Check the show notes for links and info about today's guest. Follow us on Instagram at NotBlankEnoughPod. This episode was produced during the COVID-19 pandemic of 2020 and recorded remotely. Our show today was produced by Gracie Mercedes and Dave Hill and edited by Douglas Sarine and Colleen Beasley. Not Blank Enough is a Gumption Pictures production.